In a world where kindness can be both a beacon of hope and a catalyst for unexpected consequences, one girl's simple act of courage on a school playground sets in motion a chain of events that will shake her community to its core. As 12-year-old Emily stands up for a bullied classmate, she unknowingly opens a Pandora's box of long-buried secrets, forcing everyone around her to confront uncomfortable truths about racism, justice, and the power of speaking up. What begins as a moment of compassion soon spirals into a heart-wrenching journey that will test Emily's resolve, challenge her beliefs, and ultimately reveal that the line between right and wrong is far more blurred than she ever imagined. Prepare to have your emotions stirred and your perspectives challenged in this gripping tale of innocence lost and courage found. The late summer sun beat down on the bustling playground of Oakwood Middle School in suburban Chicago. Laughter and chatter filled the air as students enjoyed their recess, savoring these last few days of warmth before autumn set in. Among the sea of kids was 12-year-old Emily Parker, her auburn hair pulled back in a messy ponytail as she sat on a bench, nose buried in her favorite book. Emily wasn't like most of her classmates. While others spent recess playing basketball or gossiping about the latest TikTok trends, she preferred the company of good literature. Her teachers often remarked on her maturity and compassion, traits that set her apart from her peers. As she turned a page, a commotion near the far edge of the playground caught her attention. Emily's bright green eyes peered over the top of her book, scanning the area. What she saw made her heart skip a beat. A group of 8th-grade boys, known troublemakers, had surrounded a smaller boy Emily didn't recognize. Even from a distance, she could see the fear in his eyes as the older kids towered over him, their postures menacing. Emily's mind raced. She knew she should do something, but what? The responsible thing would be to get a teacher, but by the time she found one, who knows what might happen. Without realizing it, she had already closed her book and stood up. As she approached, snippets of conversation reached her ears. "Go back where you came from," one of the older boys sneered. "Yeah, we don't want your kind here," another chimed in. Emily's blood ran cold as she realized what was happening. This wasn't just ordinary bullying. It was a racist attack. The boy they had cornered was black, and from the look of his crisp new backpack and uncertain demeanor, he was probably new to the school. Her heart pounding, Emily quickened her pace. She was scared, no doubt about it, but something deep inside her wouldn't let her walk away. As she got closer, she could see tears welling up in the new kid's eyes, and her resolve strengthened. "Hey!" Emily shouted, her voice surprisingly steady. "Leave him alone." The group of boys turned, momentarily stunned to see this small girl confronting them. Their ringleader, a hulking kid named Tyler, recovered quickly and smirked. "Mind your own business, little girl," he sneered. "This doesn't concern you." Emily felt her knees shaking, but she stood her ground. "It does concern me," she shot back. "You can't treat people like this. It's wrong, and you know it." Tyler took a menacing step toward her. "Oh yeah? And what are you going to do about it?" Emily's mind raced. What was she going to do? She was seriously outnumbered, and these boys were much bigger than her. But then she caught the eye of the new kid, saw the glimmer of hope there, and knew she couldn't back down. "I'm going to tell everyone," she said, her voice growing stronger. "I'm going to tell the teachers, the principal, your parents. I'll post about it online if I have to. Everyone will know what kind of people you really are." The bullies exchanged uneasy glances. They knew Emily wasn't bluffing. She had a reputation for being principled and following through on her word. "You wouldn't dare," Tyler growled, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his voice. Emily stood tall, channeling every ounce of courage she possessed. "Try me." For a tense moment, nobody moved. Then, from across the playground, a teacher's voice rang out. "What's going on over there?" The spell was broken. Tyler and his gang quickly dispersed, muttering threats under their breath as they skulked away. Emily let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She turned to the boy they had been tormenting. Up close, she could see he was about her age, with kind brown eyes and a smattering of freckles across his nose. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. He nodded, wiping away a stray tear. Yeah, I think so. Thanks for that. I'm Jamal. I'm Emily, she replied with a small smile. Are you new here? Jamal nodded again. First day. Not exactly the welcome I was hoping for. Emily's heart went out to him. I'm so sorry that happened. Those guys are jerks. But not everyone here is like that, I promise. As they talked, Emily could see Mrs. Rodriguez, one of the English teachers, making her way towards them. She knew she'd have to explain what happened, and a part of her was nervous about the consequences. But looking at Jamal's grateful face, she knew she'd made the right choice. Come on, she said, gently touching Jamal's arm. Let's go talk to Mrs. Rodriguez. She's really nice, and she'll want to know what those boys did. As they walked across the playground, Emily could feel eyes on them. News traveled fast in middle school, and she knew that by the end of the day, everyone would be talking about what had happened. She overheard whispers and caught snippets of conversation. Did you see what Emily Parker did? I can't believe she stood up to Tyler and his gang. Who's that new kid she's with? Emily tried to ignore the stares and murmurs, focusing instead on making sure Jamal was okay. As they approached Mrs. Rodriguez, she took a deep breath, preparing to recount the incident. What Emily didn't realize was that this moment, this simple act of standing up for what was right, would set in motion a chain of events that would change her life, Jamal's life, and the entire Oakwood community in ways she could never have imagined. The ripples of her courage would spread far beyond the playground, touching lives and challenging deeply held beliefs. As the bell rang, signaling the end of recess, Emily and Jamal shared a look of newfound friendship. Neither of them could have predicted the trials and revelations that lay ahead, or the profound impact their connection would have on exposing long-buried truths and healing deep-seated wounds in their school and community. For now, though, they were just two kids, brought together by an act of kindness, facing the rest of the school day side by side. As they walked back into the building, Emily felt a mix of emotions: pride in herself for doing the right thing, worry about the consequences, and a strange sense that this was just the beginning of something much bigger than herself. Little did she know just how right that feeling would prove to be. Emily's act of courage on the playground spread through Oakwood Middle School like wildfire. By the time the final bell rang, everyone from the 6th grade hallway to the teacher's lounge was buzzing about how the quiet bookworm had stood up to Tyler's gang. As Emily walked home that afternoon, her phone buzzed incessantly with notifications. Friends and classmates were tagging her in social media posts, praising her bravery. She felt a mix of pride and discomfort at the sudden attention. Hey, Emily, wait up. She turned to see Jamal jogging to catch up with her. His smile was bright, a stark contrast to the fear in his eyes just hours earlier. I just wanted to say thanks again, he said, falling into step beside her. You have no idea how much that meant to me. Emily blushed. Anyone would have done the same. Jamal shook his head. No, they wouldn't. Trust me, I know. As they walked, Emily noticed people on the street giving them curious glances. She quickened her pace, eager to get home and process everything that had happened. The next morning, Emily woke to find her phone flooded with messages. Overnight, someone had posted a shaky video of her confrontation with Tyler's gang. The clip had gone viral, racking up thousands of views and shares. Local girl stands up to racism, read one headline. Middle schooler shows courage beyond her years, proclaimed another. Emily's stomach churned as she scrolled through the comments. While most were supportive, some were critical, questioning her motives or minimizing the incident. At school, Emily felt like she was under a microscope. Students she'd never spoken to before came up to congratulate her. Teachers gave her approving nods in the hallway. Even the principal, Dr. Matthews, called her into his office to commend her actions. What you did was very brave, Emily, he said, his voice grave. But I want you to be prepared. This kind of attention can be complicated. Emily nodded, not fully understanding what he meant, but sensing the weight of his words. As she left his office, she overheard two teachers whispering. It's good that someone finally did something, one said. Yes, but did it have to be so public? The other replied. You know how sensitive these issues can be. Emily frowned, confused by their reaction. Wasn't standing up against racism always the right thing to do? At lunch, Emily found herself at the center of attention. Kids crowded around her table, peppering her with questions. She noticed Jamal sitting alone at the far end of the cafeteria and waved him over. As he approached, a hush fell over the group. Hey, Jamal, Emily said brightly, trying to dispel the awkwardness. Want to sit with us? He nodded gratefully, sliding into the seat next to her. Conversation slowly resumed, but Emily couldn't help noticing the sideways glances some students were giving Jamal. After school, a local news van was parked outside. A reporter with perfectly coiffed hair approached Emily, microphone in hand. Emily Parker? I'm Diane Chun from Channel 7 News. We'd love to interview you about your heroic stand against racism. You're quite the inspiration. Emily stammered, overwhelmed. I don't know. I didn't do it to be on TV. Oh, don't be modest. Diane beamed. Your story is exactly what people need to hear right now. You're making a real difference. Before Emily could respond, her phone buzzed. It was a message from an anti-racism group, inviting her to speak at their next rally. Her head spun. How had things escalated so quickly? That evening, Emily's parents sat her down for a serious talk. Honey, we're so proud of you, her mom began. But we need to discuss how to handle all this attention. Her dad nodded. Some people might try to use your story for their own agendas. We need to be careful. Emily listened, a knot forming in her stomach. She had only wanted to help Jamal, not become the face of a movement. As the days passed, Emily noticed subtle changes in the school's atmosphere. Some students seemed to go out of their way to be friendly to Jamal and other minority students. Others grew quieter, shooting resentful looks when they thought no one was watching. One morning, Emily found a note slipped into her locker. Stay in your lane, it read. You're making things worse. She crumpled the paper, fighting back tears. Was she really helping, or just stirring up trouble? During history class, a heated debate broke out about racial discrimination. Emily felt all eyes turn to her, expecting her to chime in. She sank lower in her seat, wishing she could disappear. After class, her teacher, Mr. Thompson, pulled her aside. Emily, I know this isn't easy, he said gently, but what you did was important. Sometimes doing the right thing comes with challenges. If you ever need to talk, my door is open. Emily nodded gratefully, feeling a little lighter. That afternoon, she met Jamal at the library to study. As they worked, she noticed him glancing nervously at his phone. Everything okay? She asked. Jamal hesitated. Yeah, it's just, some kids have been sending me weird messages. Probably nothing. Emily frowned, sensing there was more to the story. But before she could press further, Jamal changed the subject. As they left the library, a group of parents was gathered outside, engaged in a heated discussion. Emily caught snippets of their conversation. It's about time someone addressed the racism in this school. Oh, please, it was one incident. Now everyone's overreacting. My kid feels uncomfortable. All this focus on race is divisive. Emily and Jamal hurried past, pretending not to hear, but the tension in the air was palpable. That night, as Emily lay in bed scrolling through social media, she came across a post that made her blood run cold. Someone had created a fake profile using her name and image, posting inflammatory comments about race relations at Oakwood. Panic rising in her throat, she quickly reported the account. But the damage was already done. The comments were being shared and screenshot, sparking a firestorm of debate. Emily turned off her phone, her mind reeling. How had her simple act of kindness spiraled into this? She thought of Jamal, of the scared look in his eyes on that first day. Despite all the chaos, she knew she'd do it again in a heartbeat. As she drifted off to sleep, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Something bigger was brewing at Oakwood Middle School, and whether she liked it or not, she was now at the center of it all. Little did she know, The true test of her courage was yet to come. As weeks passed, the initial furor over Emily's stand against racism began to settle. Life at Oakwood Middle School seemed to be returning to normal, but beneath the surface, tensions simmered. Emily noticed subtle changes in Jamal's behavior. The once grateful boy who had stuck to her side now seemed distant, often lost in thought. She'd catch him staring at his phone with a troubled expression, only to quickly hide it when he noticed her looking. One crisp autumn afternoon, Emily spotted Jamal huddled in a corner of the schoolyard with a group of older students she didn't recognize. Their hushed tones and furtive glances set off alarm bells in her mind. "Hey, Jamal!" she called out, waving. Jamal's head snapped up, a flicker of panic crossing his face before he composed himself. "Oh, hey, Emily," he replied, his voice oddly strained. The group quickly dispersed as Emily approached. "What was that about?" Emily asked, trying to keep her tone casual. Jamal shrugged, avoiding eye contact. "Nothing important, just some guys from my neighborhood." Emily frowned, unconvinced, but decided not to push it. As they walked to class together, an uncomfortable silence hung between them. In the hallways, Emily overheard whispered conversations that made her skin crawl. "Did you get one of those messages?" "Yeah, it was messed up." "Who do you think is sending them?" "I don't know, but I'm scared to say anything." "You saw what happened to Tyler's group." Emily's mind raced. What messages? And what exactly had happened to Tyler and his friends? She hadn't seen them around much lately, now that she thought about it. During lunch, Emily's friend Zoe leaned in close, her voice low. Have you been getting any weird texts lately?" Emily shook her head. "No, why?" Zoe bit her lip, glancing around nervously. "A bunch of kids have been getting these anonymous hate messages. Really nasty stuff. Racial slurs, threats, you name it." Emily's blood ran cold. "That's awful. Have they reported it?" "Some have, but it's hard to trace. The messages come from different numbers each time." Zoe hesitated. "Emily, some people think it might be connected to what happened with you and Jamal." Emily felt like she'd been punched in the gut. "What? How?" Zoe shrugged helplessly. "I don't know. It's just the timing, you know? And a lot of the messages mention that incident." As Emily tried to process this information, she noticed Jamal across the cafeteria. He was hunched over his phone, fingers flying across the screen, a look of intense concentration on his face. When he saw Emily watching, he quickly pocketed the device and hurried out of the room. That afternoon, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. As she walked home, she spotted Jamal ahead of her, engrossed in his phone again. On impulse, she decided to follow him. Jamal led her to a small park a few blocks from school. He sat on a bench, still fixated on his screen. Emily crept closer, hiding behind a nearby tree. She knew it was wrong to spy, but her concern outweighed her guilt. From her vantage point, Emily could just make out Jamal's screen. What she saw made her gasp involuntarily. Jamal was logged into an anonymous messaging app, typing out what looked like one of the hate messages Zoe had described. Emily watched in horror as he hit send, then quickly switched to another account to compose a different message. Her sharp intake of breath must have carried, because Jamal's head snapped up. His eyes locked with Emily's, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. "Emily?" Jamal's voice was a mix of shock and something else. "Fear?" Emily stepped out from behind the tree, her mind reeling. "Jamal, what are you doing? Are you the one sending those messages?" Jamal's face crumpled. He looked down at his phone, then back at Emily, tears welling in his eyes. "I can explain," he choked out. But before he could say more, Emily turned and ran. Her heart pounded in her ears as she sprinted home, trying to make sense of what she'd seen. How could Jamal, the very person she'd stood up for, be behind such hateful acts? As she burst through her front door, Emily's mom looked up in alarm. "Honey, what's wrong?" Emily opened her mouth to explain, but no words came out. How could she even begin to describe the betrayal she felt? That night, Emily tossed and turned, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. She thought back to that day on the playground, how scared and vulnerable Jamal had looked. Had it all been an act? Or was there more to the story? As dawn broke, Emily made a decision. She couldn't ignore what she'd seen, but she also couldn't bring herself to immediately report Jamal. She needed to understand why. Why would someone who had been a victim of racism turn around and perpetrate it against others? With trembling fingers, she sent Jamal a text. "We need to talk. Meet me before school." The response came almost immediately. "Okay, I'm so sorry, Emily. I'll explain everything." As Emily got ready for school, a gnawing feeling in her stomach told her that this conversation would change everything. The simple act of kindness that had started it all now seemed like a distant memory. She was about to step into a much more complex moral quagmire, one that would test her beliefs, her friendships, and her understanding of right and wrong. Little did Emily know, the revelations to come would shake the foundations of Oakwood Middle School and force everyone, students, teachers, and parents alike, to confront uncomfortable truths about race, justice, and the long shadow cast by past wrongs. As she walked to school, steeling herself for the conversation ahead, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing on the precipice of something much bigger than herself. The real test of her courage was just beginning. Emily arrived at school early, her stomach in knots. She found Jamal waiting by the bike racks, his eyes red-rimmed and shoulders slumped. As she approached, he looked up, a mix of shame and fear etched across his face. "Emily, he began, but she cut him off. "Not here," she said, glancing around at the steadily filling schoolyard. "Let's go somewhere private." They found an empty classroom, closing the door behind them. Emily turned to face Jamal, her heart pounding. "Explain," she demanded, her voice barely above a whisper. Jamal took a deep breath. "It's not what you think, Emily. I mean, it is, but it's complicated." "Complicated?" Emily's voice rose. "You're sending hate messages, Jamal. After everything that happened, how could you?" Tears welled in Jamal's eyes. "You don't understand. This isn't the first school I've been to where I've faced racism. At my last school, it was so bad that my parents had to pull me out. I thought coming here would be different, especially after what you did for me. But then I started noticing things. Whispers, looks. It was happening all over again." Emily softened slightly, but her confusion remained. "But why send those messages? How does that help?" Jamal's expression hardened. "Because sometimes the only way to fight fire is with fire. I wanted them to feel what I felt, to understand the pain of being targeted, of feeling unsafe in your own school." Emily shook her head, struggling to process his words. "But Jamal, that's not right. You're hurting innocent people too. And what about the people who stood up for you? Don't they deserve better?" A flicker of guilt crossed Jamal's face. "I know. I got carried away. Once I started, it was like I couldn't stop. All the anger I'd been holding in just came pouring out." As they talked, Emily's mind raced. She thought about the complex layers of hurt and resentment that had led Jamal to this point. While she couldn't condone his actions, a part of her understood the pain driving them. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. Panicked, Jamal thrust his phone into Emily's hands. "Here, look through it. You'll see everything. I can't keep this secret anymore. But I need time to figure out what to do." Before Emily could respond, Jamal bolted from the room, leaving her alone with his phone and the weight of a decision that felt impossibly heavy. Throughout the day, Emily struggled to focus on her classes. During lunch, she found a quiet corner and began to scroll through Jamal's phone, her heart sinking with each message she read. The vitriol and pain contained in those texts was overwhelming. But as she dug deeper, Emily noticed something strange. Some of the messages seemed to be responses to threats or insults that weren't visible in the chat history. Frowning, she began to search more thoroughly. What she uncovered made her gasp out loud. Hidden beneath the layer of Jamal's outgoing messages was evidence of a much larger, more insidious campaign of harassment. Messages targeting not just Jamal but other minority students as well. Threats, racial slurs, and intimidation tactics that made her skin crawl. Emily's mind reeled. Jamal's actions, while inexcusable, were a response to a much bigger problem. A problem that seemed to reach far beyond just a few school bullies. As the final bell rang, Emily made a decision. She couldn't handle this alone. With shaking hands, she dialed the number of Mr. Thompson, the teacher who had offered his support. "Mr. Thompson? It's Emily. I need your help. I've discovered something big, and I don't know what to do." Mr. Thompson's voice was calm but concerned. "Okay, Emily, take a deep breath. Can you come to my classroom? We'll figure this out together." As Emily made her way to Mr. Thompson's room, she felt as though she was standing on the edge of a precipice. The truth she had uncovered would change everything for her, for Jamal, for the entire school. But she knew she couldn't keep it hidden. Clutching Jamal's phone like a lifeline, Emily stepped into Mr. Thompson's classroom, ready to reveal the complex web of hurt, retaliation, and systemic problems she had uncovered. Little did she know, this was just the tip of the iceberg, and the revelations to come would shake Oakwood Middle School to its very foundations. As she began to explain what she had found to Mr. Thompson, whose face grew increasingly grave, Emily realized that her simple act of courage on the playground had set in motion a chain of events that would force her entire community to confront uncomfortable truths about racism, responsibility, and the long shadow cast by silence and indifference. The real challenge was just beginning, and Emily knew that the choices she made in the coming days would test not just her courage, but her compassion, her sense of justice, and her understanding of right and wrong in ways she had never imagined. The weight of her discovery pressed heavily on Emily's shoulders as she left Mr. Thompson's classroom. His words echoed in her mind. "This is serious, Emily. We need to handle this carefully." They had agreed to meet with the principal first thing in the morning. Until then, Emily was to keep everything she'd learned to herself. But as she walked home, her phone buzzed with a text from Jamal. "Can we talk?" Emily's heart raced. She knew she couldn't avoid this conversation. They met at the same park where she had caught him earlier. Jamal's eyes were red-rimmed, his posture defeated. "Did you look through my phone?" he asked quietly. Emily nodded, taking a deep breath. "Jamal, I saw everything. Not just what you sent, but what you've been receiving. Why didn't you tell anyone?" Jamal's face crumpled. "Who would believe me? I'm the new kid, the outsider. And after what happened with Tyler's gang, I thought I could handle it myself. By becoming just like them?" Emily's voice was gentle but firm. "I know it was wrong," Jamal choked out. "But you don't know what it's like, Emily, to feel so alone, so hated. I wanted them to feel what I felt." Emily's heart ached for him, even as she grappled with the wrongness of his actions. "But Jamal, you hurt innocent people too. And now, I don't know how to fix this." As they talked, neither noticed a figure lurking nearby, phone in hand, recording their conversation. The next morning, Emily steeled herself as she walked into the principal's office. Mr. Thompson was already there, along with Dr. Matthews, the principal, and to Emily's surprise, Jamal. "Emily," Dr. Matthews began, his voice grave, "we need to discuss what's been happening." But before Emily could speak, the door burst open. A red-faced man Emily recognized as Tyler's father stormed in, waving his phone. "What's this I hear about false accusations? My son's been expelled, and now I find out it was all based on lies." Emily's stomach dropped as she realized what had happened. Their conversation in the park had been recorded and leaked. The room erupted into chaos. Tyler's father demanded justice. Dr. Matthews tried to maintain order, and Jamal sat silently, looking shell-shocked. In the midst of the commotion, Emily's voice cut through. "Stop!" All eyes turned to her. "This isn't just about Tyler or Jamal or me," she said, her voice shaking but determined. "There's something much bigger going on here, and we need to address it." Over the next hour, Emily laid out everything she had discovered: the widespread harassment, the retaliatory messages, the culture of silence that had allowed it all to fester. As she spoke, she could see the shock and dismay on the adults' faces. Mr. Thompson looked grim but unsurprised, as if he had long suspected something like this. When she finished, Dr. Matthews sank heavily into his chair. This is far worse than we realized. We'll need to launch a full investigation. Tyler's father, his anger deflated, looked lost. I had no idea. Tyler never said anything about being bullied. Jamal, who had remained silent throughout, finally spoke up. None of us did. We all thought we were alone. As they left the office, Emily felt a mix of relief and apprehension. The truth was out, but what would happen now? The answer came sooner than she expected. By lunchtime, rumors were flying. Someone, Emily suspected Tyler's father, had leaked parts of the meeting to other parents. The school was in an uproar. Emily found herself at the center of a storm. Some students hailed her as a hero for exposing the truth. Others accused her of stirring up trouble and making things worse. As she walked down the hallway, she overheard heated arguments. Can you believe what's been going on? I always knew something was off, but I never said anything. This is all blown out of proportion. Kids will be kids, right? Emily felt overwhelmed. She had wanted to make things better, but now it seemed like the entire school was at war with itself. After school, a crowd had gathered outside. Parents, students, and even a few local reporters clamored for information. Emily tried to slip away unnoticed, but a reporter spotted her. Emily Parker, can you comment on the allegations of widespread racial harassment at Oakwood? Before she could respond, she felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Mr. Thompson. No comment, he said firmly, guiding her away from the crowd. As they walked, Mr. Thompson spoke quietly. You did the right thing, Emily, but this isn't over. Things might get worse before they get better. Emily nodded, a lump in her throat. She thought of Jamal, of Tyler, of all the students caught in this web of hurt and retaliation. How had her simple act of standing up to bullies led to this? That night, as Emily tried to sleep, her phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends, classmates, and numbers she didn't recognize. Some were supportive, others angry or scared. One message caught her eye. It was from Jamal. I'm sorry for everything. Thank you for telling the truth. Whatever happens now, I'm glad I met you. Emily stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. She had exposed a painful truth, but at what cost? And what would happen tomorrow when they all had to face each other again? As she drifted into an uneasy sleep, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The real test for her, for Jamal, for the entire Oakwood community, was yet to come. The following weeks at Oakwood Middle School were unlike anything Emily had ever experienced. The investigation initiated by Dr. Matthews had opened a Pandora's box of long-buried tensions and grievances. As Emily walked into school on a crisp Monday morning, she could feel the change in the air. The once bustling hallways were eerily quiet, with students huddled in small groups, whispering tensely. Posters promoting unity and anti-bullying plastered the walls, a stark reminder of the ongoing turmoil. In her first period class, Emily noticed several empty seats. Rumors circulated that some parents had pulled their children out of school in protest or fear. The teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, looked tired as she tried to engage the subdued class in a discussion about current events. Today, we're going to talk about the importance of open dialogue in resolving conflicts. Ms. Rodriguez began, her voice strained. Does anyone want to share their thoughts on recent events? The room fell silent. Emily felt all eyes turn to her, expecting her to speak up. She sank lower in her seat, the weight of expectation crushing her. Finally, a girl named Alicia raised her hand. I think it's good that people are finally talking about this stuff, she said hesitantly. But it's also scary. Like, I'm afraid to say the wrong thing and get in trouble. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the class. Emily felt a pang of guilt. Had her actions made people afraid to speak up? As the day progressed, Emily witnessed the deep divisions that had formed within the school community. In the cafeteria, she noticed students self-segregating more than usual. The table where Jamal usually sat was conspicuously empty. During passing period, Emily overheard a heated argument between two parents in the main office. "This whole investigation is a witch hunt," one father exclaimed. "Kids will be kids. We're blowing this out of proportion. Are you kidding me?" A mother retorted, her voice shaking with anger. "Our children have been suffering in silence for years. It's about time someone did something." Emily hurried past, her cheeks burning. She couldn't help but feel responsible for the chaos unfolding around her. After school, Emily attended a hastily organized community meeting in the gymnasium. The bleachers were packed with parents, teachers, and students, all buzzing with nervous energy. Dr. Matthews stood at the podium looking haggard. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "We're here to discuss the findings of our initial investigation and the steps we're taking to address the issues that have come to light." As he spoke about new anti-bullying initiatives and diversity training programs, Emily scanned the crowd. She spotted Jamal sitting alone in a corner, his head down. Across the gym, she saw Tyler and his parents, their expressions a mix of anger and shame. Suddenly, a voice cut through the principal's speech. "This is ridiculous," a man shouted. "My tax dollars shouldn't be going to all this sensitivity nonsense. What about discipline? What about personal responsibility?" The gym erupted into chaos, with people shouting over each other. Emily watched in horror as years of pent-up frustration and resentment boiled over. "What about our kids who've been terrorized?" someone else yelled. "Where was your concern for personal responsibility then?" As the meeting devolved into a shouting match, Emily felt a tap on her shoulder. It was Mr. Thompson. "Come on," he said quietly. "Let's get out of here." They slipped out of the gym and into the quiet hallway. Emily leaned against a locker, fighting back tears. "This is all my fault," she whispered. Mr. Thompson shook his head. "No, Emily, you didn't create these problems. You just brought them to light. Sometimes things have to get worse before they can get better." As they talked, Emily's phone buzzed. It was a text from Jamal. "Can we meet? I need to tell you something important." Emily's heart raced. What more could there possibly be? Later that evening, as Emily sat on her bed trying to process the day's events, her mom knocked on the door. "Honey, there's someone here to see you." To Emily's surprise, it was Mrs. Chun, the reporter who had tried to interview her weeks ago. "Emily," she said, her expression serious, "I know you've been through a lot, but I think there's more to this story than what's being reported. Would you be willing to talk to me? Off the record, for now." Emily hesitated, remembering Mr. Thompson's warning about things getting worse before they got better. But something in Mrs. Chen's tone made her pause. "Okay," Emily said finally, "but first, there's someone else you need to talk to." As she dialed Jamal's number, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to uncover something that would change everything once again. The divide in her community ran deeper than anyone realized, and she was standing at the edge of a revelation that would force everyone to confront uncomfortable truths about the past and the present. Little did Emily know, the conversation she was about to have would set in motion a chain of events that would not only shake Oakwood Middle School to its core but would also ripple out into the broader community, forcing a reckoning with long-buried secrets and systemic injustices that went far beyond the walls of their school. Emily's heart raced as she waited for Jamal outside the local library. The weight of Mrs. Chen's interest and the cryptic nature of Jamal's message had her on edge. When Jamal finally arrived, his face was a mask of worry and determination. "Emily," he said, his voice low, "there's something you need to see." Inside the library, they huddled around a computer in a secluded corner. Jamal pulled up a series of old newspaper articles and school records he had uncovered during his late-night research. "Look at this," he whispered, pointing to a headline from 15 years ago. "Local school district settles discrimination lawsuit." As Emily read through the articles, her eyes widened. The lawsuit detailed systemic discrimination against minority students, including incidents eerily similar to what she and Jamal had experienced. "But that's not all," Jamal continued, pulling up more recent documents. "I think the school has been covering up incidents for years. Look at these disciplinary records. Emily leaned in, her brow furrowed. The records showed a clear pattern. Minority students receiving harsher punishments for similar offenses, incidents of racial harassment being downplayed or ignored, and a troubling lack of diversity among staff and administration. How did you find all this? Emily asked, amazed. Jamal shrugged. I couldn't sleep, started digging. But Emily, there's more. I think some of the teachers know about this. Remember Mr. Thompson's reaction when we told him? He wasn't surprised at all. As if on cue, Emily's phone buzzed with a text from Mr. Thompson. Need to talk. It's important. Meet me at the coffee shop across from school. Emily and Jamal exchanged looks. Should we go? Jamal asked hesitantly. I think we have to, Emily replied. But first, we need to make copies of everything you found. At the coffee shop, they found Mr. Thompson sitting in a corner booth, looking nervous. As they approached, he glanced around before speaking in a low voice. I'm glad you came, he said. There's something you need to know. The problems at Oakwood go deeper than you realize. I've been trying to address them for years, but... He trailed off, looking pained. Over the next hour, Mr. Thompson revealed a shocking truth. A long-standing conspiracy within the school system to maintain a facade of racial harmony while sweeping real issues under the rug. He had been collecting evidence for years, but fear of retaliation had kept him silent. But now, with everything that's happened, he concluded, I think it's time to bring it all to light. Will you help me? Emily and Jamal sat in stunned silence, trying to process the enormity of what they'd learned. Finally, Emily spoke up. We need to tell Mrs. Chun, she said firmly. This is bigger than just our school. People need to know. As they left the coffee shop, a plan forming in their minds, Emily couldn't shake a feeling of both dread and determination. They were about to uncover a truth that would shake their community to its core. Over the next few days, Emily, Jamal, and Mr. Thompson worked tirelessly, compiling evidence and corroborating stories. They reached out to former students, pored over public records, and pieced together a damning narrative of systemic neglect and cover-ups. On a rainy Friday afternoon, they met with Mrs. Chun in a quiet park. As they laid out their findings, the reporter's eyes grew wide. This is incredible, she breathed. And you're sure about all of this? They nodded solemnly. Emily spoke up, her voice steady despite her nerves. We think it's time people knew the truth. Will you help us tell the story? Mrs. Chun looked at them, a mix of admiration and concern in her eyes. You understand what this could mean, right? This won't just affect your school. This could have repercussions throughout the entire district, maybe even the state. Emily glanced at Jamal and Mr. Thompson, seeing her own determination reflected in their eyes. We know, she said, but it's the right thing to do. As they parted ways, the weight of their decision settled on Emily's shoulders. She knew that once the story broke, nothing would ever be the same. The comfortable illusions that had shrouded their community for years were about to be shattered. That night, as Emily lay in bed, her mind racing with all they had uncovered, her phone buzzed with a text from Jamal. Are we really doing this? Emily took a deep breath before replying. Yes, it's time for the truth to come out. Little did they know, the storm they were about to unleash would be even more powerful than they could have imagined, forcing their entire community to confront long-buried truths and re-examine the very foundations of their society. The following week was a blur of clandestine meetings and late-night research sessions. Emily, Jamal, and Mr. Thompson, now joined by Mrs. Chun, worked tirelessly to unravel the complex web of deceit that had ensnared Oakwood Middle School for decades. Their investigation led them to dusty archives in the town hall basement, where they discovered redacted school board minutes hinting at cover-ups dating back to the 1980s. They interviewed former students who shared harrowing stories of discrimination that had been systematically downplayed or ignored. One afternoon, as they pored over documents in Mr. Thompson's classroom, a knock at the door made them all jump. It was Ms. Rodriguez, the English teacher. I know what you're doing, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. And I want to help. Ms. Rodriguez revealed that she had been keeping a secret diary of incidents for years, documenting the subtle and not-so-subtle ways the school had maintained its facade of racial harmony at the expense of minority students. As their evidence mounted, so did the risks. Emily noticed cars she didn't recognize parked outside her house. Jamal reported receiving threatening phone calls. Mr. Thompson was called into multiple routine meetings with the administration. Despite the pressure, they pressed on. Mrs. Chen's investigative skills proved invaluable as she helped them connect the dots between seemingly unrelated incidents. The breakthrough came when they uncovered a series of emails between Dr. Matthews and several influential community members, including the mayor and the head of the local business association. The emails revealed a coordinated effort to suppress information about racial incidents to maintain the town's reputation and property values. "This goes beyond just the school," Mrs. Chun said, her eyes wide as she read through the emails. "This is a town-wide conspiracy." The gravity of their discovery weighed heavily on Emily. She knew that exposing this truth would change everything, not just for her school, but for her entire community. One evening, as they gathered in Mr. Thompson's living room to compile their findings, Emily voiced the fear they had all been feeling. "Are we doing the right thing?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "This could tear our whole town apart." Jamal took her hand, his expression resolute. "It's already torn apart, Emily. We're just bringing the truth to light." Mr. Thompson nodded solemnly. "Sometimes, things need to break completely before they can be rebuilt properly." As they put the finishing touches on their exposé, a sense of both dread and determination settled over the group. They knew that once this information was released, there would be no going back. Mrs. Chun looked at each of them in turn. "Are you all sure about this? Once we publish, your lives will never be the same." Emily thought about the scared boy she had defended on the playground all those weeks ago. She thought about Jamal's pain, about the years of silence and suffering that so many students had endured. She thought about the future students who deserved better. "We're sure," she said, her voice steady. "It's time for the truth to come out." As they left Mr. Thompson's house that night, the weight of their decision heavy on their shoulders, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the precipice of something monumental. The next morning, as Emily walked to school, she noticed an unusual buzz in the air. People were huddled in small groups, talking in hushed tones and staring at their phones. When she reached the school gates, she saw a crowd gathered around the entrance. In the center stood Dr. Matthews, his face ashen, surrounded by reporters and angry parents. Emily's phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Chun. "It's out. Brace yourself." Taking a deep breath, Emily pushed through the crowd and entered the school. As she walked down the hallway, she could feel all eyes on her. Some looked at her with admiration, others with anger or fear. She found Jamal by his locker, looking both terrified and relieved. "We did it," he said quietly. Emily nodded, her heart racing. "Yeah, we did. Now what?" Before Jamal could answer, the intercom crackled to life. Dr. Matthews' voice, strained and defeated, filled the halls. "Attention all students and staff. In light of recent revelations, all classes are canceled for today. There will be an emergency community meeting in the gymnasium at 3 p.m. Attendance is mandatory." As the announcement ended, a charged silence fell over the school. Emily and Jamal exchanged glances, knowing that the real battle was just beginning. The truth was out, but the hardest part lay ahead. Confronting the past, healing deep wounds, and rebuilding their community from the ground up. As they walked towards Mr. Thompson's classroom, ready to face whatever came next, Emily realized that her simple act of courage on the playground had set in motion a chain of events that would reshape not just her school, but her entire town. The conspiracy of silence had been broken. Now it was time for voices long silenced to be heard. The gymnasium buzzed with tension as students, parents, teachers, and community members filed in for the emergency meeting. Emily, Jamal, and Mr. Thompson sat together near the front, acutely aware of the mix of supportive and hostile glances directed their way. Dr. Matthews took the podium, his usual confident demeanor replaced by a look of resigned defeat. I'm sure you've all seen the news, he began, his voice wavering. The allegations that have come to light are deeply troubling. We're here today to address these issues openly and honestly. As he spoke, Emily scanned the crowd. She saw Mrs. Chun in the back, notebook in hand. Tyler and his parents sat stiffly a few rows behind her, their expressions unreadable. In the far corner, a group of students held up signs demanding justice and change. Suddenly, a voice cut through the principal's carefully prepared statement. This is outrageous. It was Mr. Carlson, a prominent local businessman and school board member. These accusations are nothing but sensationalism and lies. I demand to know who's responsible for this smear campaign. The gym erupted into chaos, with people shouting over each other. Emily felt her heart racing, but before she could react, Jamal stood up. I am, he said, his voice clear and strong despite the trembling in his hands. We are. A hush fell over the crowd as all eyes turned to Jamal, Emily, and Mr. Thompson. Emily stood up beside her friend, feeling a surge of courage. What we uncovered isn't a smear campaign, Emily said, her voice carrying across the now silent gym. It's the truth, a truth that's been buried for far too long. Mr. Thompson joined them, placing a supportive hand on each of their shoulders. These students have shown more courage and integrity than many of us adults, he said. It's time we listen to them. Over the next hour, Emily, Jamal, and Mr. Thompson laid out their findings. They shared stories of systemic discrimination, showed evidence of cover-ups, and revealed the complex web of complicity that had allowed these injustices to persist for decades. As they spoke, Emily watched the faces in the crowd. She saw shock, anger, and denial, but also recognition and shame from those who had known but stayed silent. Some parents hugged their children tightly, tears streaming down their faces as they heard echoes of their own experiences. When they finished, the gym was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, people began to stand up and share their own stories. Former students, parents, and even a few teachers came forward, their voices shaky but determined as they corroborated the findings and added their own experiences to the record. Ms. Rodriguez stood up, clutching her diary of incidents. I've documented years of discrimination and bias, she said, her voice breaking. I always felt powerless to stop it, but not anymore. As the meeting stretched into the evening, it became clear that this was just the beginning of a long and painful process of reckoning and healing for the entire community. Dr. Matthews, looking both chastened and determined, took the podium again. It's clear that we have failed many of our students and families, he said. What happened here is unacceptable, and it stops now. I am announcing the formation of a community task force to address these issues and implement real, lasting change. As the meeting finally adjourned, Emily felt a mix of exhaustion and cautious hope. She knew that exposing the truth was just the first step. The real work of rebuilding trust and creating a truly inclusive community lay ahead. Outside the gym, Emily found herself face to face with Tyler. For a moment, they just stared at each other, the weight of everything that had happened hanging between them. I'm sorry, Tyler said finally, his voice barely audible. I never realized. I knew things weren't right, but I didn't know how bad it was. Emily nodded, seeing the genuine remorse in his eyes. It's not just about apologizing, she said gently. It's about doing better. All of us. As they parted ways, Emily felt a shift in the air. The truth had been painful, but it had also created an opening for real change. That night, as Emily sat on her front porch, trying to process everything that had happened, she received a text from Jamal. Thank you for standing with me. We did the right thing. Emily smiled, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. She knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in weeks, she felt truly hopeful. As she looked out at her neighborhood, imagining the conversations happening in homes all across town, Emily realized that her simple act of courage on the playground had grown into something much bigger than herself. It had become a catalyst for change, a spark that had ignited a movement for justice and equality in her community. The moment of truth had arrived, and though the future was uncertain, Emily knew that they had taken the first crucial step towards building a better, more inclusive world for everyone. The weeks following the explosive community meeting were a whirlwind of activity and emotion for Emily and the entire Oakwood community. The story had made national news, turning their small suburban town into the epicenter of a broader conversation about systemic racism and educational inequality. As Emily walked into school on a crisp autumn morning, she noticed the changes immediately. New posters promoting diversity and inclusion lined the hallways. Students who had once kept to their own cliques were now mingling more freely. There was a palpable sense of both tension and possibility in the air. Dr. Matthews had made good on his promise to form a community task force. Emily and Jamal, along with Mr. Thompson and several other students, parents, and community leaders, had been invited to join. Their first meeting was scheduled for that afternoon. In class, Emily noticed that discussions were more open and honest than ever before. Teachers who had once shied away from difficult topics now encouraged frank conversations about race, privilege, and social justice. During lunch, Emily sat with a diverse group of students, including some she had never spoken to before. As they talked, she was struck by how much they all had in common, despite their different backgrounds. "I never realized how much I was missing out on by sticking to my own little group," said Sarah, a girl Emily had known since kindergarten but had rarely interacted with. "This whole thing, it's been eye-opening." After school, Emily and Jamal made their way to the library for the task force meeting. The room was packed with a mix of familiar and new faces, all there to work towards positive change. Dr. Matthews opened the meeting, his demeanor more humble than Emily had ever seen. "We're here to listen, learn, and take concrete action," he said. "What happened at Oakwood can never happen again." Over the next 2 hours, the group engaged in passionate but respectful dialogue. They discussed new policies to address discrimination, plans for diversifying the curriculum and staff, and strategies for creating a more inclusive school culture. Emily was impressed by the thoughtfulness and commitment she saw from everyone present. Even those who had initially been skeptical or defensive were now actively contributing ideas. As the meeting wrapped up, Mr. Thompson pulled Emily and Jamal aside. "I'm so proud of you both," he said, his eyes shining. "You've started something incredible here, but remember, this is just the beginning. Real change takes time and continued effort." Walking home, Emily and Jamal reflected on everything that had happened. "Do you think we really made a difference?" Jamal asked, a hint of doubt in his voice. Emily thought for a moment before responding. "I think we did. It's not perfect and we still have a long way to go. But look at how much has already changed. People are talking, really talking, about things they used to ignore." As they reached Emily's house, they saw Mrs. Chin approaching, a warm smile on her face. "I wanted to thank you both," she said. "Your courage in coming forward with the truth. It's inspired people far beyond Oakwood. Schools across the country are now examining their own practices." Emily felt a surge of pride and hope. What had started as a simple act of standing up to bullies had grown into something far bigger than she could have ever imagined. That evening, as Emily sat on her porch swing, she thought about the journey of the past few months. She had learned so much about herself, her community, and the complex realities of the world. She had faced fear, doubt, and adversity, but had also discovered strength and allies she never knew she had. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jamal. "Check out the school website." Emily quickly pulled up the page to find a new announcement. Oakwood Middle School would be hosting a district-wide summit on promoting diversity and inclusion in education. Students, including Emily and Jamal, were invited to lead workshops and panel discussions. As she read the details, Emily felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. There was still so much work to be done, so many hearts and minds to reach. But for the first time, she felt truly hopeful about the future. Emily looked out at her neighborhood, imagining the ripples of change spreading outward from their small community. She knew that the road ahead would be challenging, that there would be setbacks and resistance. But she also knew that they had taken the first crucial steps towards building a more just and equitable world. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the street, Emily made a silent promise to herself. She would continue to speak up, to stand for what was right, and to work towards a future where every student, regardless of their background, could feel safe, valued, and empowered. The story that had begun on that playground months ago was far from over. In fact, Emily realized it was just the beginning of a new chapter, and not just for her, but for her entire community. And she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, armed with the knowledge that one voice, one act of courage, could indeed change the world. So, if you haven't subscribed yet, click the subscribe button below and join our community. Based on your interests, we've picked this story for you that's showing on your screen right now. Click to watch it now. We're sure you'll love it. See you next time.